Welcome to the pod, episode 9. Can't believe we are here. We've made it. And we are talking about a huge topic today. Everyone is obsessed with bums. Glute training. Why do people fuck it up? Where have I seen most people mess up their glute training in the gym? How can we do it better? What's the crack with glute training? Now, honestly, when I'm in the gym and I'm watching people train, this is the thing that makes me cringe and makes me upset for multiple reasons, because I'm seeing people trying to train their glutes. To be honest, I just think they're doing a terrible job. Bit brutal, but it's the truth. And why I say that is one of the most important topics that I wanted to dive into is this conversation with relative motion versus orientation. And when I say most people are fucking up training the glutes, is the main driver, the main job that glute tissue on the back of your hips has is to extend your hips, hip extension, to push your hips through space, to move you forward through space. Why sprinters typically, who are very good at moving forward horizontally through space, have massive glutes. It's because that's what glutes are for, to push you forward through space. And typically what I see when a lot of people are training the glutes is people doing whatever it takes to avoid that true hip extension. And what I mean by that is more lumbar extension, more hamstring extension, rather than the actual glutes driving it. And you can still get good results doing this. People still have good results. I'll dive into that later. But first, we're going to start with this little convo about relative motion versus orientation. Just need to put the mic back in here so I can demonstrate this. If you can see me, the tissues that are going to be working are going to be surrounded by the joints that are moving. So you want your joints to be moving around the tissues that you want to be developing and growing and challenging. So you want those joints to move relatively to the joints around them, rather than a complete orientation or movement of the whole body and multiple joints. You want those joints to move independently. So I'm going to give you an example now. If you look at the screen, and it's basically, I will move my head with my headphones on, and this is an example of orientation. So I'm looking to the right, and my whole head moves. Looking to the left, my whole head moves. So that is orientation. There is no difference with movements between my headphones and my head. Now, this is an example of relative motion. Now, if you saw that, my headphones stayed still and my head moved relative to the position of my headphones. Now, this is super important. Just checking we're still recording. We're all good. Now, this is a super important concept with training everything in the gym, but particularly because we're talking about glutes, we're going to talk about glutes and the hips today. So often when I see people training their glutes, effectively, if my head is the pelvis, the hips through space, and the headphones could either be the knee, the back, either of those things, we effectively want the hips to be moving relatively to the knees and the back. We want them to be moving independently to create that length through that glute tissue to actually challenge it, rather than the whole system or the whole body moving back. If you are doing a RDL, for example, and you want to focus on the glutes, and your butt moves back in space, but your knee also moves back in space, the whole system is moving. You are creating an orientation rather than a relative motion. And if you're not creating that relative motion, you're not creating that length at the targeted tissue, the joint, the glutes, the hips, then you're going to get a more general stimulus. You're going to get a general reaction from the body rather than a relative reaction at the glutes, a local reaction versus a more global reaction. So this is one thing I see people mess up with glute kickbacks on the cable machine. I see the whole body moving as one rather than the leg independently going back in an extension. So this is a good example for me to do a couple demos. I will do that actually. YOLO. Let me just get up and do a couple. So if you can see on the screen, and this is a podcast, but kickbacks like this, okay? Hip extension, you can see my glutes working. And what I'll often see is something like this, where people just use momentum and you see the whole leg and back and hip is moving rather than this relative motion. You see, that's just hip extension, well, a little bit of lumbar extension, but just hip extension versus this. So I often see people just swinging and kicking. I'm not going to give any more demonstrations because this is a podcast after all. 1 second, put my headphones back. And that is like the prime example of how I see people messing up glute training. You're training the whole thing. You're not actually isolating the glutes, and therefore you're not getting a pure stimulus on the hips, on that glute tissue. You're getting it generally. You're getting the back working. People are training glutes the whole time, and I'll hear them in the gym. Oh, I feel like my back. Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's your back moving. Your lumbar is extending rather than your hips. You need to be able to isolate hip flexion to really get that length through the glutes. I love the single leg kickstand hinges or single leg RDLs with the glute bias, because that for me is the best exercise to train the glutes in a lengthened position. And there's a lot of evidence coming out that you need to take a tissue through a full range of motion, controlled, and that is very, very positive for a hypertrophic response, for building muscle. You're not going to be able to take the glutes through their full length of motion, through their full range of motion, if it's an orientation movement. If the whole system moves together rather than independently, if your joints don't move independently, you will not be able to create that huge length and tearing and therefore stimulus of that glute tissue. You're just going to get like, oh, my back, I feel my back. Yeah, no wonder you feel your back. You're doing it wrong. Or you're not getting the outcome you're thinking of, you are getting. Or if you just feel it in the hamstrings rather than the glutes. Like, it's very rare for me to train someone or see someone in the gym prior to our sessions or whatever, for them to actually take their glute tissue through a full range of motion. Because when we do it, they're normally like sweating profusely, they're in a lot of pain, and they're like cramping in their glute tissue. And they're like, what's going on? How's this even happening? I've been training glutes for years. I've been doing heavy deadlifts for years. And yeah, you will have taken your glutes through a decent range of motion, but it's this relative motion and this full range of motion where you're just creating huge tissue length on the glutes, and then you've got a lot of tension, particularly in these kickstand RDLs, when that tissue is lengthened and there's loads of tension. You can load that up infinitely, rather than something like a barbell hip thrust, where you've just got a lot of tension in the shortened position, but not anything in the lengthened position. And that's even if you can control your lumbar, your knees, to not get legs working or back working instead of the glutes. Another thing I'll see is people on split squats or lunges, or again, single leg variations of RDLs. They will do whatever it takes to not create length through the glutes. What this would look like is, instead of keeping the pelvis squared on, so you create external rotation at the glute when it's hip flexion, when you're flexing the hip. Instead, so that will lengthen it. That's hard to explain in a video, but when you send your bum back on one side, say you're working your right glute, you want to create length through your right glute. If your right glute comes back but your left glute is further behind, you can see your right glute will still have a lot of length that it could gain if you push that left hip forward. So the right glute is, your right butt cheek is further behind than your left butt cheek when you're hinging back on a single leg RDL or kickstand hinge. That will create more length at the glute. People will do whatever it takes to run away from a full length glute contraction. Your body will naturally do loads of compensations to kind of try and hide, make it more easy, whatever. you need to understand good biomechanics, good anatomy to really create that length and tension in that lengthened position with the glutes. Now, this is just the thing that is missing. Honestly, a good understanding of biomechanics to take those glutes through that full range of motion, and a good eye to see when you are compensating through another joint. It's all about this relative motion versus orientation. Now, that is the key thing with training. If you want to develop certain tissues, you need to create that relative motion where you've got the opportunity to lengthen that tissue and put it under a high amount of load, rather than move the whole body globally and maybe put the whole body through a good amount of load, but you're not going to get that same stimulus when you create that versus when you create that relative motion. So those are a few like common compensations I see with glute training. I know this is probably quite hard to visualize for some of you, and if you have questions, just message me. I'll send you a video. I'll help you out. But a couple compensations. So too much lower back, too much orientations. They're moving the whole body versus just relative motion. And other things I've seen that could be better. The intensity. You have to train hard. Like, sessions need to be hard. I love working with individuals who are willing to kind of put themselves on the line and really, it sounds weird, but suffer and push themselves to the intensity required to really cause brilliant change and stimulus. And that is huge. Like, you're not going to get significant, brilliant results without this kind of close proximity to failure and maintaining this good technical performance, good technical model of creating a nice amount of length through the tissues, controlling the movement, controlling the eccentric, and applying a good amount of intent and output whilst maintaining that high quality of movement. So that quality can never dip, because then you're going to compensate. You're going to start using things like momentum to try and get the same output, and you're not going to get the results you want, because these things are lacking slightly. Now, that's a few things where I see like a lot of people mess up with glute training. They never really train the glutes in the shortened position, in the lengthened position, sorry. Everything is shortened. Hip extensions, glute kickbacks when they don't have tension in the lengthened position, which is why I'm so biased, particularly for these wall-referenced RDLs, single-leg RDLs. They're just like an absolute weapon for training you and creating loads of mechanical tension in that lengthened position. Mechanical tension being the tension that is on the individual fibers in the tissue, and that is generally what causes the stimulus to create change, to create a stimulus, so your body can adapt over time. The other thing is here that I wanted to dive into is I still see those people who kind of fuck this up a little bit with their glute training get good results. Like, there will still be some good reps, even though you might not have the perfect understanding of relative motion versus orientation, or how to create a lengthened position in the glutes without compensating through another joint. You still see people with pretty developed glutes. Now, this comes down to a bit of a macro topic that I've been thinking about lately. With training, I think the differences in outcomes hypertrophically for beginners to intermediates is so small, and has so much to do with your genetics and a variety of other factors, how much stress you've got in your life, how well you sleep, your nutrition, these kinds of things, that these changes might be quite small for some people. Like, because I say this because I've seen people training badly and I've seen them get pretty good results. And that is just like a person to person perspective, like seeing subjectively 100%, seeing different individuals get good results with technically poor training. Now, of course, they could capitalize on making that better potentially, but the difference is with good training and like average training isn't that big, particularly acutely or in the short term. But I think where it starts to come is when you'll have some athletes and some individuals who just will do anything and get amazing results, biased towards creating a lot of muscle. And you can see that physically, versus others who kind of suck at building muscle. Always been skinny, never really had good control over their body. Those are more the people where I think they need to be more dialed. And then those elite people who get results doing anything, I think the rate of progress and the rate of progression will change depending on the quality of their training, which is hard to decipher. We're probably looking at a few small percentage points with regards to like how many centimeters or millimeters they build on different tissues here. So it's not big differences for some people, whether we're doing like high quality training or just doing general training. And the difference there being like, are you doing what you're trying to get the outcome to do? Do you feel your back when you're trying to train your glutes, for example? That's bad training, but you still might get good results because you've got good genetics and you will get a good few reps in there by luck, by chance, because you're putting in hard intent anyway. So there will be some relative motion, but you're just missing out on all of it. And what I'm saying is like, you can get good results doing average training. But if you want to take it up a notch, or if you've plateaued, these kind of thoughts and principles will increase your likelihood of success, your repeatability of success. You'll get more success with more people because it goes down to the principles of movement, physiology, and biomechanics that will give you a stimulus and response. So there's nowhere to hide. There's less places to hide. And for me, it's like anyone can get good results with someone with good genetics who can build a lot of muscle quickly. But you want to try and be the person, the coach or the individual that gets significant results for yourself or for others sustainably, consistently, repeatedly across space, across time, across the universe. And that's kind of what science is, in a way. You are doing an experiment, and then you need to repeat it to ensure the reliability of your thesis, to back up your thesis, to back up your ideas. Same goes with training. If you're a personal trainer or a coach and you want to be able to be a good coach, you need to be able to get repeatable, sustainable results across a wide variety of Sorry for interrupting the pod. I'm just here to advertise the programs. A couple programs in the link in the bio, in the link tree. Hypertrophy program if you want to get jacked out of your nut, and the fundamentals program if you're a bit bored of your training, you want to mix it up, you're fed up of just lifting weights in the gym and you want to come a little bit more athletic. Dive in to the link tree and get involved now. Across the entire population, ideally. That's why it's so good if you're just starting out as a PT or a coach to train a vast variety of individuals. Don't niche. You want to be in front of hundreds of different people so you can figure out how to get success when people have different morphology, different bone lengths, different structures, different lifestyle, different thoughts, different feelings, all of these things. You want to be in front of those people so you can be like, all right, this person has the biggest pancake bum I've ever seen. They've tried training with PTs before. They always have back pain. Now, this is someone that the typical training hasn't worked for. They've tried before. It didn't work. Now, why didn't it work? This is when you can start asking questions, developing your knowledge deeper, and getting a better understanding of the true principles that drive change, rather than just working with superstars where everything works the first time. Elite athletes, some elite athletes, whatever, where they just pick up everything beautifully the first time and they never really have a challenge, so everything you do would work for them. You want to be in front of the people where some things don't work, and everyone's different. So some people might be really good at building muscle, but terrible at jumping and being elastic and being quick out of certain positions in and out, might have terrible coordination between different muscle tissues, between their body, upper and lower, whatever. So you're going to get different things with different people. So that's why it's so important not to niche and figure out like, hey, I want to be in front of a bunch of different people. I want to see people who are good at certain things and bad at others. I want to figure out why they're good at certain things and bad at others, so we can bring that together and develop your own training model, principles and philosophy to get good training outcomes across a population that are repeatable and reliable. So the big things I want you to take away from this pod: relative motion versus orientation. That is huge if you actually want to see how people are moving, what joints are moving, how to create length at certain tissues that might be chronically short or chronically long, how to get good training outcomes for everyone consistently. Training the short versus lengthened position in hypertrophy, how there is a lot of benefit to taking those tissues into those long lengthened positions under load. Ensure they're training hard enough, so getting that close proximity to failure to cause a stimulus, create that high levels of mechanical tension to lead to that stimulus, and doing sufficient amount of volume there. A few common compensations with glute training: too much back movement, too much extension through the lumbar spine, or too much extension through the knee versus the hip. And conversations actually about why it's important to train a variety of people. And why it's like some people will get results, some people won't, and a few reasons into that. So just a short one today: why most people fuck up training their glutes, bit of depth into a few other areas. Hope you enjoy. Hope you have a good day. Thanks for listening.